Hello everyone, my name is Tanya Burr. I will be presenting on a recent qualitative research study exploring educators' understandings of infant and toddler agency. In presenting on aspects of this research study today, I would like to acknowledge the invaluable contributions of my research supervisor, Professor Sheila Degotardi. To begin, I am joining you today from Turrbal and Yagara lands. This is where I live, work and play. Turrbal are the traditional custodians north of the river, and Yagara, the traditional custodians south of the river in Brisbane, formerly known as Meanjin, on the east coast of Australia. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that these lands have always been places for teaching and learning for thousands of generations before us. Agency as a construct of humanity has been a focus for our societies for many eras and is referred to across numerous fields of study. From a cross-cultural perspective, the emergence of the concept of agency in Western society stemmed from the Christian belief in the individual soul, from legal traditions of individual rights, and in the acclamation of individual freedoms for achieving an autonomous self. However, this is countered by the history of the East, from which the tradition of the Confucian ideal of the social being arose a more collective understanding of agency, one in which agentic individuals are interdependent and act for the benefit of the group. More recent philosophical writings also argue that agency is an inherently social construct, primarily involving recognition of an individual as a member of the community, bound by its norms and values. In reflection of these different contextualizations, it is interesting to question where agency is placed within communities inclusive of children. Since the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, the recognition and promotion of children's agency has become embedded with a number of international early years curriculum documents, including the Early Years Learning Framework, Australia's national curriculum for early childhood education and care. Subsequent research and literature since the framework's inception has also identified agency through this rights-based lens, identifying educators' understandings with similar notions involving choice, decision-making, and autonomy. This is a problematic image for educators working with infants and toddlers, where so much of their time is spent in close interaction with another. Added to this, there has been very little research so far on infant and toddler agency, in order for the early childhood sector to grow a more meaningful and relevant understanding, and in turn for educators to create opportunities and foster agency in the children they work with. What has been found so far is a need to focus much more on how the constructive nature of power relations and interdependence between a child and educator can recognise and promote infant and toddler agency. The critical feminist lens is the paradigm how I will be framing my findings and implications for the sector today. So this paradigm highlights a symbiotic struggle of early childhood educators with care of infants being traditionally viewed as women's work and therefore not necessitating of high skills or knowledge. A pedagogy of care, while seen as high quality practice in birth to 3 spaces globally, is not valued as a skill worthy of professional regard. In order then to seek professional recognition and self-worth, it has been surmised that educators within the birth to 3 sphere strive to prioritise educative methods and diminish the importance of infants and toddlers' physical and emotional care practices. This is a concerning trend, as it is within these intimate relationships and physical care routines where possibilities for infant and toddlers' agency can be promoted and achieved. Further to this, it is acknowledged that in striving to be an inclusive early childhood curriculum document, the framework largely diminishes the visibility of infants and toddlers. While it is often put forward that the framework invites interpretation from educators to identify the different needs and ways of learning in the birth to 3 space, the reality is we are asking this of educators who, due to regulatory requirements, have less experience and training in critical reflection and professional inquiry. By exposing possible restricted thinking and opportunities for agency provided to infants and toddlers, this study aimed to illuminate the place of child agency in the pedagogical knowledge base of those who work with our youngest children. Raising consciousness in this space could not only create transformative change in birth to 3 practices, but also on the esteem and the professional opportunities we provide to infant and toddler educators. So this is the research question I'm seeking to explore. How do educators working with infants and toddlers in early childhood settings understand agency? And what role do they ascribe to themselves in young children's realisation of agency? I will now present the methodology, findings, and possible implications for the early childhood sector. So this research study incorporated interviews with participants, alongside their engagement in a week-long reflective journal task. The data collection process is outlined here. Participants were 15 educators working with infants and toddlers in early childhood centres in Brisbane, Queensland. All participants were female, but varied in early childhood qualifications, years of experience, and frequency of access to infant-toddler related professional development. Data collection took place over late 2019 and early 2020. The onset of COVID restrictions created a small interruption with the follow-up interviews for the final 2 participants unable to be undertaken. Thematic analysis was employed to code participant interview responses, which was then triangulated with participants' journal entries to build trustworthiness in the findings. 2 distinct themes were revealed relating to the different aspects of the research question. Firstly, the educators' conceptions of agency, and a second theme of how educators explained their pedagogy in fostering children's agency. Within these themes, a number of codes were identified. During analysis, it became clear data saturation was reached as similar responses were occurring over and over, and no different concepts or practices surfaced during the final participant interviews. In explaining their understandings of agency, there were 3 main concepts identified from participant responses. When asked directly about their understandings of agency, choice was the most commonly referenced term participants provided in their responses. Providing space and opportunity for choice was seen to relate predominantly to children's play activities. Interestingly, 2 participants' journal entries actually revealed no choice existed for the child to participate or not in certain activities, namely craft. Instead, the choice for the child was only how they participated. A child's choice, and in turn agency, was not seen to exist when in opposition to an educated choice. Whilst the concept of capability was not seen to link to agency for participants as readily as other concepts, one participant spoke about the concept in depth. This was interesting as there were strong references to capability and capacity in the broader literature on human agency. Capability is essentially viewed as foundational to fostering agency, in firstly realising a person, in this case a young child, has agency. They are an agentic being. This premise was strengthened in the findings, where 3 more participants referred to the concept of capability for the first time in their post-journal interviews. Could it be that the reflective journal exercise, where they had been asked to look for instances of child agency, helped them develop a foundational understanding that infants and toddlers have agency? The theme of thinking and problem solving was not frequently cited in the data. However, it was interesting to note as this concept also may signify an educator's early understanding of a young child's cognitive agency. While participants did identify some key elements in their conceptualisation of agency, it was also very clear that many had a limited understanding of what the concept means. 9 out of the 15 participants provided responses which conveyed confusion and uncertainty about the concept. In response to the initial interview question, how do you view agency in your work with babies and toddlers? 3 participants clearly articulated they found it hard to define. Other participants, in response to the same question, provided a number of other different explanations, which revealed misunderstanding of agency as a concept. These included links to educator self-regulation, learning through play and visual cues, a link to intentional teaching, and communicating with families. In defining their educator role in fostering infant and toddler agency, 5 further categories were derived from analysis of interviews and journal entries. Responsiveness is a term used often in the work of early childhood educators, and it was no surprise that it was a highly referenced pedagogical practice. Interestingly though, most participants provided no explicit explanation of how their responsiveness to a child's ideas or interests indeed fostered their agency. They were just responsive. Reference to the practice of stepping back was the most common concept provided, with participants using this term a total of 29 times during their interviews to define their current or aspiring practices in supporting infant and toddler agency. It was particularly interesting to see this shared terminology amongst individual participants, as this term was not used at all by me as the interviewer. This definition can initially be seen as closely linked to responsiveness, but it encompassed a deeper level of observation and more explicit awareness of how the presence or absence of an educator can support or constrain children's agency. It is also important to highlight that common to every participant when discussing the practice of stepping back was the component of watching or observing. This was noted by participants as a strategy to learn more about the child's actions or intentions, and if they may need to step in, and at times a way to acknowledge and appreciate the child's abilities. The acknowledgement of power relations between infants and educators and its impact upon agency was a common thread for 1/3 of participants. Of particular interest is how this finding connected to early childhood research and literature, often positioning the recognition of power as central to the ability of the educator in fostering a child's agency. As is commonly referenced throughout early childhood pedagogical literature, the environment's role in supporting children's learning was also referred to by a small number of participants. And during the post-journal interviews, 4 participants across 3 different services all made references to how they work as a team. One final notable finding in the data related to the variation observed between educators working at the same early childhood service. 14 out of the 15 participants were at the same service as another participant in the study. My early assumption was the findings would show similarities in their practice, pedagogical understandings, and access to professional learning. This was not found to be the case, with 6 of the 7 pairs presenting considerable differences. But there was one exception to the pattern. One pair, both diploma qualified, both articulated in their initial interviews an understanding of agency and provide a clear explanation of how children's choices are facilitated and seen as independent of educator plans. Similarities in responses further extended to their focus on their environment to support children's agency, and with both seeing the need for flexibility in the educator role to abandon their planning and respect the child's right to develop their own plans. These participants were also the only pair to complete all 5 days of the journal task and engage in critical reflection during their post-journal interview for what they could further improve in their practice. Upon comparison of all demographic data, this was also the only pair who both reported they accessed regular professional development relating to infants and toddlers. The level of professional learning relating to infants and toddlers' education and care was concerning, with 6 of the 15 never having attended anything and 5 only recalling one time. This was over a total participant average of 4.5 years experience in the early childhood sector. So is the low level of access to shared professional learning reported in this study systemic of birth to 3 educators more broadly in the sector? And if so, are they being disempowered in their role as agents of change to then foster agency in the children they work with? Both Australian and international research in recent years have proposed the need for a specialised focus in professional learning for infant and toddler educators, one that involves a process-oriented training approach combining personal awareness with emerging theoretical knowledge to gain a deeper understanding of the importance of their role and care relationship with infants and toddlers they work with. This is my recommendation for the sector. In order to really see infants and toddlers and to understand, advocate and foster their agency in early childhood education and care settings, we need to firstly see and value their educators. We need to empower their agency and provide much more opportunity for collaborative and reflective professional learning experiences, which celebrate the uniqueness of birth to 3 pedagogy. I would like to acknowledge the work of researchers and writers I have drawn upon in my presentation today. And a very special thank you to the Early Childhood Centres for participating in this study and for seeing the benefits of research to the early childhood sector, and to the advocacy of birth to 3 education and care. In particular, I would like to thank the 15 educators involved for sharing their valuable time and experiences with me. Lastly, thank you to the organising committee at Charles Sturt University for convening this online conference and providing an opportunity to share and learn from current research in the early childhood sector. If anyone has any questions or feedback about this research study, you're welcome to email me. Thank you.